The response is thoughtful, and you've built those responses to be helpful and useful for people who are not just, who are your prospective customers, who are making that buying decision right now. I mean, nobody goes and reads reviews for fun. When they come to your review, right, they are at the bottom of the funnel. There's no one closer to the bottom of the funnel than someone actually reading your reviews.
True.
And you have a choice to make. You're either going to engage in that conversation, or you're going to let two strangers talk to each other.
Hey everyone, today's guest is George Swetiltz, an operator turned builder who knows what it takes to solve problems at scale. George led strategy at Sara Lee and earned his MBA from Harvard, and then later ran a 220 location business where he saw firsthand how hard it is to deliver consistent results across hundreds of touchpoints. When AI tools like ChatGPT emerged, George didn't set out to replace people. He set out to solve one specific challenge better than humans could do it truly at scale. By narrowing the problem, setting clear constraints, and embedding human context into the systems, he discovered how AI can deliver not just speed, but quality and authenticity. So in the conversation today, we're going to be exploring how you can think about AI in the right way, how to identify the right problems, constrain them to solving a problem, and build solutions that improve, not just automate work. Welcome to the show, George.
Great to be here.
So let's kind of start with your journey, if you will. I know that you've had quite a unique career path. And so you've gone from Sara Lee and your MBA and the business, and then now at Right Response. So can you talk me through a little bit of like some of the learning factors that you've had throughout that course of time in the 200 location business as well, and kind of what you saw?
Yeah. So, working in a 220 location business was completely different than anything I had done before. And part of the challenge was trying to generate organic growth, not through paid ads, not through social, but trying to get people to convert when they come to your site, convert when they come to your location. And that was really the gold standard because you're driving growth and you're not paying for that growth. And so we spent a lot of time thinking about how do you do that? And of course, your website is critical. The quality of all of those things that you do from a marketing perspective are critical. But at a certain point, the customer lands on your reviews. They Google you, they search, and they find you, and they read about you. And we were finding that we weren't good there. We were good everywhere else, but we weren't good there. And there were a lot of factors for that when you think about doing that at scale. But it applies to any business, large or small. And so we struggled with that. This was before AI, before ChatGPT, before all of these tools existed. And we struggled with the platforms that were in place, the way that we were organized. For example, you have 220 locations with 220 managers and regional managers and call centers. And how do you execute on excellence on that side of the business so that all the work that you did driving people to your location wasn't for naught? And that was very, very difficult. And we ended up exiting the business in 21. And in 22, ChatGPT came out. And I thought this would have been incredibly helpful for us at that time. This might have been the path to solving that. And so I brought a team together and we decided to tackle that problem. And that led to Right Response AI. And it's been a lot of fun because starting a software business, starting a platform, had always been something that I had thought about.
That's cool. And then when you were like thinking about this problem that you had in the 220 person business, which I mean, frankly, the reality of the world today where people are wanting to make sure that they're making the right choice of like, hey, considering the internet and everything that's going on, like there's a lot more kind of Machiavellian oriented people out there. Like, how can I trust this person or this business with my money, really? And so those reviews are, critical. The reality is that there's loads of different reputation management softwares and platforms out there. So what exactly were you seeing kind of missing in this space that you were looking to solve differently?
Right. So let's think about the history of review response. right? There's one element of it. There's review requests, there's analysis, but there's review responses. So let's focus on that. So originally, people would write review responses. They would go in and they would physically write them. When everything got started, that's what you would do. And of course, that's great when you have a couple locations, much tougher at scale.
Sure.
Then platforms came out, and those platforms were really around templates. And at that time, and they still exist, some of the platforms still have templates, but of course they're very repetitive. And people now recognize that instantly. I would personally say that templates are better than generic AI because it's clear that they're templates and you can build templates to solve specific problems. But then ChatGPT comes out, generic AI comes out, and this is viewed as something better. But in fact, it's not better. In my view, it's much worse because it is just essentially parroting back what's in the review itself. There's nothing new. There's nothing useful. There's nothing helpful for anybody. And I find when you do research and talk to people, they get turned off by these generic AI responses that are pretending to be human, but are not. They're very disingenuous. And so what we set the task as is, how do we use AI to essentially, putting my marketing hat on, bring the website to the response? In my old job, we spent a ton of time and money building an amazing website with all sorts of messaging and promises and brand value. The reality is more people read reviews than visit websites. And so how do you bring all of the content that's in that website to the response itself? And what we do with Right Response is we build what we call a fact library. And it's essentially the content of your website in an if-then form. If somebody talks about this, then let's tell them about this element of our brand value. Right? If someone asks the question about why are we better, let's tell them that we've won this award in the local community for 10 years straight. And so we build this fact library, and then when a review comes in, we assess that review against all the facts in the fact library, determine which ones are relevant, and build those into the response.
Got it. So you're effectively giving AI a logic framework by which it's supposed to be able to function so that you're actually able to have a bit more of what would be a genuine oriented response that would have a utility to the consumer of that review that allows for them to make a buying decision.
That's right. That's exactly right. So you're responding to the person who wrote the review in a thoughtful way. The response is thoughtful, and you've built those responses to be helpful and useful for people who are not yet, who are your prospective customers, who are making that buying decision right now. I mean, nobody goes and reads reviews for fun. When they come to your review, right, they are at the bottom of the funnel. There's no one closer to the bottom of the funnel than someone actually reading your reviews.
True.
And you have a choice to make. You're either going to engage in that conversation, or you're going to let two strangers talk to each other, right? The person who wrote the review and the person who's reading them are having this, they're engaging with each other, and you are completely out of the conversation.
Yep. So, in the kind of AI landscape, and I think that this is interesting, and the kind of the premise of the conversation today is you've taken this experience that you have throughout your career that you've built up. You solved a problem for your 220 location business, and how exactly do I go about this? And then now looked at, all right, we have this new technology that's emerging that we are able to do, but then you apply the actual implementation of that and realize it doesn't quite work exactly as well as if I were to have done this myself. So how do I actually create that utility? So the thing that I wanted to kind of dive a little bit more into now is how do you think about your experience in your career, AI as a utility, and then a problem that the market ultimately has, and kind of think about how exactly do I go about what is a good fit problem for my experience plus AI that then allows for the market to be able to have a problem solved that needs to be solved.
So I think, part of it is, when you're trying to use AI, I found that the smaller you make the problem, right, the better off you are. People try to do big things with AI. And I found, at least through our own experience, that big things fail. Because essentially, when you throw enough into an AI model, it has to decide what it's going to work on. And these models cost a lot of money, and the companies are trying to economize, and so they do things to constrain their own costs. And part of that is how it solves problems. And so we found success by taking this problem and breaking it down into many, many, many pieces, and then agentically tying them together. And so I think that when anybody has a problem that they want to solve with AI, the first thing that you want to try to do is break it down into the smallest pieces that you can before solving, and then stringing them together in your own logic flow.
I will adamantly agree with you on that. I mean, I think you can still solve big problems with AI, but I think that you have to create all the smaller pieces to create. It's like the idea of like, I'm going to go bake a cake. I have to realize that there's a bunch of different ingredients that I have to put into it to actually do so. And if being able to actually break it down into smaller logical pieces, the same way that you would do yourself if you were solving the problem, right? So let's say that I was, from a research perspective, I'm trying to determine what is the white space in the market for a specific brand. I'd want to break it down into like, what is the competitive set? What is the ICP? What exactly is the current positioning? Like, what are all these little pieces that I'm taking in aggregate? So like, go and collect all of those pieces of information and then start to do the analysis across it. So like, what exactly, the same way that your mind is thinking through it is vital. If you don't actually take the logic points that you've built up over your career, which I think is the core of what I'm hoping that listeners can take out of this, is that you have built throughout the course of your career personally, and listeners as well, they've built a segment of expertise that they've built over the course of their career. And if you take the logic criteria that you've taken in the example of yours, the 220 location business, we have people at the bottom of funnel that are wanting to go to the location. They're trying to gather information to be able to make a buying decision. And the more authentic of a response we give, the better of a buyer that we have crossing through to the location. And so you're taking the logic, same criteria, and then just transforming that into an automated AI-oriented version. But if you try to think about it of like, okay, I just need to respond to the review, you would have ended up with that kind of boilerplate-oriented responses without all the logic, the step-by-step criteria that you were taking before, right?
Right. I definitely agree with your point. I think an interesting, when I talk to, so we have an agency portal where we've structured a way of operating for agencies and make it easy for agencies to use our platform. And when I talk to agency owners, normally they approach me because there may be some feature that's missing in the platform that they're using, or they think we might be lower cost or whatever it is, but they still view this area as a task, right? It's a review management is a task that they're doing for a customer. They haven't yet, and I'm sure some have, but many people that I talk to have not yet realized or kind of put the pieces together that AI allows them to be creative in the review ecosystem, right? They view like there's this creative area that I work on, and then there's this task stuff that I have to do. And they haven't yet made that connection yet, that the review piece is actually a creative piece. And they can add a lot of value in that piece if they can to grab the customer that they've worked so hard to find.
You spend an inordinate amount of money, ad spend, dollars, content creation, all the things to get the consumer to read a review. And then if it falls flat, it was all for naught, right? The thing that I think is kind of interesting that you're describing a little bit in there too is like you have a perception, not you specifically, but society has this perception right now that AI is either one, doesn't have a utility in creative, two, that it's either going to replace creative or doesn't have a place in it. And I think it's quite interesting. I mean, the reality of how I see the world is I think that it's the same way that you would end up taking and having a kind of yes and oriented conversation. So like, how do you take what it is that you're doing, get to the same output or better than you would have done faster, right? So how do you get to the true valuable components of what it is that you're doing as quickly as you possibly can? So the question I have for you is like, how are you thinking about utilizing, and how did you think about utilizing AI to actually deliver a better output than what humans would have been able to consistently do? So like you have your logic framework, you have all of those pieces, but how did you actually start to think about, all right, here's the output of what a person would do actioning this versus the implementation of what you did with Response AI?
Yeah, well, I mean, it goes back to when I was leading this alpaca, this business. When you talk to customers, they, and you interact with them, they talk to you, they tell you things they liked and didn't like, and then you respond to them in a very real way. And what we realized as a team was that we weren't doing that. When they were telling us things in public, we weren't doing that. And so the challenge was, how do you interact with people in public the way that you interact with them in private? And have you ever heard of this concept called the uncanny valley? Have you ever heard?
I haven't.
I hadn't either. And a prospective client told me about this not so long ago. And the uncanny valley was a robotics guy in Japan in the 70s. And he talked about the valley is between kind of robotics that are stylistic. So you think about like a cartoon robot that is clearly a robot and has human qualities, and it's endearing. And what he had seen was that as you got closer to human-like robotics, when it got to the point where it was almost human-like, but not quite, people fell off. They got weirded out by it because it was close, but not quite there. And then when you had a robot that was, 100%, that you would feel for it again, right? You could communicate with it. And there was a guy at MIT who just did some research, and he had badly trained AI, well-trained AI, and a human doing a task. People that, were looking at the badly trained AI were very turned off. The well-trained AI, sometimes people thought it was a human, like sometimes they mistook the human for AI, right? But this notion of trying to be human but not quite doing it turns people off. That's what he saw in the 70s. And I think that's happening again with AI.
Yeah,
you have this you can have an AI response that says, hey, thanks for letting us know. We'll investigate this. It's not attempting to be human. It's clearly a response that's deferring to the human. Right? Or you can have AI that says, oh, we're thrilled that you were delighted and, we just thought this is great. And because it's not, because you can see through it that it's not really human and therefore it turns you off. It's the same uncanny valley problem with AI. And that, I think, is what we're not trying to be human. We're trying to make the business respond in a more human-like way while it's clearly not human, right? And that's where people have comfort. Like they're more comfortable in that environment.
And so with your it is, and I think I feel like that's creating for an aspect of like the guardrails around how to utilize AI, which is something that I was hoping to dive into.
Yeah.
But so let me ask this question though, for you specifically. Are you owning and specifically saying that it's AI in the responses then?
Well, we don't, because that would be kind of weird too. You don't really have a way to, unless you kind of at the bottom, like responded to by AI.
Yeah.
You could do that. It's interesting. We could test that actually. And it's not a bad idea to do that, especially if your responses are very helpful.
Yeah.
Right. But there are these ethical problems, these ethical questions that people wrestle with all the time. But I think where we're trying to be human is just by trying to be helpful, right? Trying to have the business sound more connected without trying to pretend to have all the emotion that comes off in these kind of, silly generic AI responses.
I think it's that. I think that people sometimes have the problem with being authentically human and emotional as well. So trying to make AI be that, I think, is funny. Right. I do think that the uncanny valley conversation is a great framework on the idea of like what exactly are the guardrails around where AI can belong, where it should live and not live, at least in the modern versions, today's versions of what we have. The thing that I'm curious about is, so let's say that I'm a listener to the episode right now and I'm like thinking about AI implementation at the moment. And I'm thinking about utilizing an AI tool. And there's tons of them out there. In the course of us recording this episode, there's probably 3 more that were just launched or created, right? And so there's the ability for us to create our own, the ability for us to be watching out for things. How do you think about, and when you were starting Rapid Response, how did you think about the first steps in implementation of AI in this specific direction? Like, how did you plan that out?
Well, when we started, the issue was, can AI, in this particular space, can we make it useful? That was the question. And we had to test it for a while. And honestly, it's so much better today than it is when we launched. It continues to get better. So for example, today in our fact library, it's a single if then. If the customer mentions difficulty finding parking, tell them that the parking garage is in the back of the building. Right? And so, that's an if then where a single then makes sense.
Yep.
But if somebody mentions something about how they love the way the technician engaged with them, there are actually a lot of things that you could say. You could talk about the training that they go through. You could talk about awards they've gotten. You could talk about a lot of things. And so one of the things we're building now is multiple thens, right? So expanding on this base concept, but giving the marketers the ability to say, here is an entire range of things that I would like to talk about. And all of this just, every time that you add things, it just makes AI more complicated, right? It just makes and so what we can do now is a much heavier lift than what we could do even a year ago. But that's how we thought about it and where do we run into issues? So I'll give you an example where we still run into issues is PHI for medical businesses, right? Technically, if you say to AI, it's a medical business, we want to follow all the regulations around PHI, personal health information. AI will literally say nothing because technically you can't even respond. Like if you're a medical, because by responding, you're admitting they're a patient. Technically that's the case. You can't even respond. Right? Now, people do respond. They actually do. So trying to explain to the AI that we want to be guarded around PHI, but we want to do it in a more lenient way. And we have not perfectly cracked that code yet because it's very complicated.
It's like asking a math equation to then consider nuance, right? Which is very difficult. That's an interesting use case from like a testing experience piece.
That's right.
So but what was the phase for you you've gone through all this testing, this ideation, you figured out that yes, all right, it can solve this problem. But the reality is like, as you're finding with medical oriented businesses, it still has this a little bit of a challenge. So there was a place I'm sure that you got to where like, it's good enough now to launch and get into actually utilizing it live there in the public and in the market. At what point did you start, were you able to make that choice? Like what were the determining factors that made you choose that all right, let's start to test this out with live businesses?
Yeah, well, it really comes down to repeatability. And so when you're, as a former CEO, you want to have confidence that a tool that you're using is repeatable. And a lot of, startups, startups, they don't think about that. They just think about getting the market, just do stuff. But coming from the background that I came from, it had to be repeatable. And of course, AI is a challenge because it's never repeatable 100%. It's always slightly different. Yeah. And so we just did an incredible amount of testing to make sure that it stayed within boundaries that we were comfortable with.
Margin of error.
Yeah. And that's what gave us confidence to move forward.
I think that the way that you've applied AI with your business with rapid response is just really intriguing and such a creative, amazing way to have gone through this implementation of AI. And exactly as you're talking about, and you're mentioning earlier in the episode of bringing it down into that smallest solvable unit and how you're thinking about the application from your logic that's being put in, that if then statement kind of thing. There's so much that I think in a utility, both from the platform that you've created as usefulness to listeners for their clients and implementing it, but also just in the framework by which to apply AI to their business and how they're going to start to live in this new reality that we all have found ourselves in. And AI is here in perpetuity now, it's here to stay. And it's time that we start to look and start to adapt into this world. And I think it's just an interesting way. The guardrails, the solvable unit, the logic that you've applied with rapid response is really a truly useful utility for listeners.
Yeah, no, it's interesting too, because in this particular space, it's not about reducing headcount, getting rid of people. It's about doing something that you weren't able to do before. People have not been able to respond in a helpful way at scale. Yep. Right? So we did that, and then people came to us and said, well, can you apply this to review requests? So we started working on a review requester that used AI to integrate things about the customer that the business knows to create a stronger emotional connection in that request so that the conversion rate of requests to review goes up.
Yep.
And so we launched that a couple months ago, and it's been, very successful.
I've really enjoyed the conversation today. And I mean, the fact that you continue to innovate and continue to adapt in the market is just incredible. I know that you're offering listeners some credits to test out the platform for their clients. If you can share a little bit about that and also how to get in touch with you, George.
Yeah. So for your listeners, if you follow the link that's down in the show notes, they'll be able to get 3,000 credits versus 1,000 that our regular free trialers get.
Awesome. So we'll go ahead and include the link to that in the show notes, everybody, so you can go ahead and take advantage of those 3,000 credits, as well as links to George's LinkedIn page if you're wanting to get in touch with them directly. I find your journey in rapid response and your career journey quite inspiring and exciting of how it is you've taken AI and applied it to a problem that I think that at least any retail-oriented business is having, and applying it not in an authentic way that is creating for a better relationship with the consumer. I just think it's really fun and a great application of it that I hadn't even considered. Thank you for joining us today.
Yep. Great. Nice to be here. Thank you.
Hey everyone, thank you so much for listening in today. With all of the shifts in the industry, it is easy to feel overwhelmed or unsure of your next move. So I'm not here to try to sell you anything. I just want to give back and guide you through the uncertainty. Whether you're navigating new trends or just need some clarity, we're here to listen and offer advice. Head to creativeagencysuccess.com/chat to book a free 50-minute chat with an agency mentor who can provide you with a fresh perspective. Let's figure out the best steps for your agency's growth together.